We hope you're enjoying watching the programmes on Shine TV, but have you ever thought who might be watching you? Under new legislation, New Zealand's Spy Bureau will be able to keep an eye on what any of us are doing, something that until now hasn't been allowed. And this week it's emerged that investigative journalists are being classed as subversives by the Defence Force. Does it matter? Surely if you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to worry about. Well, tackling those issues with me today is political ethicist and theologian Dr. Matt Flannagan. Matt, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. So the GCSB gets to spend more time looking at us. Should we be worried?
Well, I think any move by the government to expand the spying powers of the GCSB relative to private citizens is something anyone should be concerned about. Whether you agree with the bill or not, it certainly is something that should raise a question and should certainly spark debate and rigorous examination, I think, rather than just sort of sitting there and saying, oh, well, we've heard this is happening, who cares?
But this, when you look back at history, I guess, here and around the world, there has been an increase in surveillance of citizens in most of the Western world. So we're not sort of outside the norm here, are we?
No, and this is, I mean, I think you can see this sometimes in history. In war times or times when there's threats, people are often, you know, they're likely to give up their freedoms, or governments are likely to step out because of a fear or what have you. And so you see this from time to time in history. You know, you see it, you know, in the Middle Ages when the Crusades happened was the same time as things like the Inquisitions rose, that sort of stuff. And I think you're seeing here, post 9/11, there's a fear of terrorism, there's a feel that you need to do more about it. And with that kind of fear, people will then say, well, what can we do? What can we push the envelope a bit to achieve this goal?
Because that would be the argument, wouldn't it? Because if you've got 9/11 happens, or the July bombings in London, I've heard people say the fact that the British government already has strong surveillance of its population underway has prevented other terrorist outrages, and so it does protect us.
Well, I mean, that could well be true, but you have to ask yourself, I mean, the validity of that whole argument. I mean, if we didn't have to have, if the police could just search my house without a warrant, we'd probably catch more criminals. You know, if the police could tap my phone 24/7, we probably would catch more criminals as well. You know, places like China have lower crime rates than places like America. But do we just judge these things on, well, they prevent some crime, so therefore they're okay? Well, there are other costs to that. There are costs to people's freedom, the cost to people's rights, cost to people's liberties, costs that are associated with giving the government more power, and just general cost too of the effect on innocent people that this kind of thing can have. You know, if you expand the powers to spy on people greater, then you gain more information about innocent people that, you know, and that information can be used or misused just as much as the information against guilty people can. So.
The argument is, of course, that if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to hide.
Well, that argument assumes that governments only ever use information in a benevolent way. You know, that if we just let the government just do whatever it likes and have no checks and balances on it, we don't have to worry because the government will behave itself. And I don't think that's actually true to how governments do behave. You know, power corrupts, and the reason it's so unthinkable to us in the West that our government would spy on us, or 1984 scenario, or Big Brother scenario, is because we have a society where there are checks and balances, where we have civil liberties that are enshrined, you know, in our history. But you go back 400 years in English history and people had to fight for that. And so we've developed a society where we have checks and balances, where we have civil liberties legislation, we require search warrants, we have separation of powers, all these kinds of things. And because of that, if you do nothing wrong, by and large, you have nothing to fear. But if you start removing those things and then expecting that the government will just stay the same, take the same stance, won't ever abuse it, won't ever step forward, I think that's just naive to human nature and naive to history. So we do have to, you know, when we're talking about restricting civil liberties or getting rid of civil liberties or bringing new restrictions in that weren't there before, we need to think carefully about what we're doing and the long-term implications of it, rather than just kind of naively saying, well, the government, we can trust the government, so who cares?
So, I mean, we saw lots of protests over the weekend. Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, they were big ones, but there were protests in many towns around the country. But that was still really a minority of people, and most people actually don't seem worried. So should we be making more fuss?
Well, a lot of those protests too, they were from people who always protest. You know, some of the I mean, not in all cases, but in some of the situations, you look there and you say, okay, these are the usual suspects. But I think there is a sense in which it does worry me that it's only those people that make a noise when you're talking about something like this. You know, whether the bill is a good thing or a bad thing, it is dealing with the issue of searches and seizures into people's lives and gaining information on people, and it's talking about potentially extending powers of spy agencies and bringing new changes to our civil liberties and what have you. It's been done under urgency. And that's something that affects pretty much everybody in society broadly. And I think the fact that it hasn't really raised much of an issue beyond the usual suspects that raise it all the time is a little bit troubling about, I think, the complacent attitude New Zealanders have. You know, there are other parts in the world, like I know certainly in the United States, where people are much more concerned about these kinds of civil liberties issues than they are here. And I think there can be good reason for that. I mean, there can be a tendency for us to think, oh, it's just paranoia or whatever. Well, but it's, like I said, the reason we can trust our governments and that appears paranoid to us is because we have these civil liberties in the first place. And they are things that you need to be careful about, saying, we'll get rid of them now because we've got this urgent problem, or we'll make an inroad now because of this urgent problem. Because once it's there in law, it can be used again and again and again and again in contexts well up beyond what we foresee now. And that needs to be thought about. You know, legislation is not a once-off thing. Legislation is a set of rules that for a period of time, and we need to really think about what are we doing, what are the implications of this, how will these powers be used, what checks and balances, and those are questions that should be being asked, yes.
I saw a comment on, I think it was on the Stuff website. It was a comment from a lady who drew a parallel with the rise of the Nazis to power in Germany in the 1930s. They came to power because they fixed economic problems. They made the trains run on time. They got everything working. But of course then, from there, it snowballed on. When I read the comment, I thought that's a very long bow to draw, but from what you're saying, it maybe isn't that long.
Well, the Nazi analogy is overused. I mean, I don't think we can expect in a few years the government to be rounding people up and putting them in concentration camps or committing genocide, you know, and that's the problem with the Nazi analogy, is it's such an extreme case. But there is a kind of general point about how civil liberties get eroded, how people will give up their freedom or their liberties if they get economic security or they feel fear or this sort of thing, you know. I mean, one issue with the Nazis, one of the things they did was in response to the Reichstag fire, you know, when there was a terrorist act against, or apparent terrorist act against the Reichstag, and this provided the thing they needed for their broader agenda. Now, I don't think the National Party are trying to, you know, engage in some kind of genocidal policy or aggressive wars or any of that stuff the Nazis are doing, but you can learn from those kinds of historical cases about human nature, and you can learn that human beings, when they see a government that fixes things for them, or they're happy about the economy, there's things that they just won't care about, and sometimes that's a mistake.
From what you're saying, it sounds like the government is riding roughshod is too strong a word, but it feels like they're being fairly cavalier with the way democracy is supposed to work.
Well, I think our government's been cavalier with democracy on a lot of issues for a long time. But you know, for example, the bill's an urgency, you know, and you know, John Key responded to his critics recently by saying they're either misinformed or they're politically motivated. We see, even if they're politically motivated, I want to know if what they're saying is true. I'm wanting to know if their concerns are valid or not. And, you know, if you're going to increase the powers of a spy agency and you're going to do things that, you know, potentially threaten civil liberties, potentially, then you should be open to having your position critiqued. You should put it out there and you should have a full consultation, you know. And we as a society probably do need to sort of ask ourselves the question, okay, where do we want to draw the lines between civil liberties and security? And that's an important question. And it's an important question which has long-term implications for how we do law in general. And certainly it's something we should expect a debate on and a discussion on and some kind of process where we try and listen to each other rather than saying, here's somebody who's going to run this through and I'm just going to go on the media and slam anyone who says otherwise and we'll pass it, you know, using our majority in Parliament. You know, even if it was a good legislation, I have issues with doing it that way. You know, urgency shouldn't be used that way. Parliament I don't think should be used that way, even with good legislation, I don't think.
Let's bring in journalism, because that's been quite an interesting sidebar to this, which started with that defamation case from the journalist who said that the Defence Force had lied about him. It then turns out that the Defence Force regards journalists as subversives. But surely journalism, in its purest form, is actually part of the democratic process. They're what keeps the government on the straight and narrow.
I mean, the difficulty there is you're dealing with a theatre of war, and when you're dealing with a situation of war and armed conflict, that's often not the best place to have an open democratic process. Soldiers need to be able, military generals need to be able to make autocratic decisions on the spot. There needs to be secrecy in that kind of context. And so you can see how a journalist's presence, particularly a journalist that has a particular agenda or spin, could be subversive. I mean, I think you've seen places like this in history, during the Vietnam War, for example, where there were times when the media, where some journalists put forward things that were just not accurate and had a profound effect, detrimental effect long term. I'm not saying I agree with the Vietnam War, but I mean, there was a sense in which the media caused a whole lot of things to happen, and the whole thing just became a disaster, which may not, and it kneecapped certain military decisions from being made, which could have ended the whole thing a lot quicker. There can be this kind of problem with the media, so I can understand that kind of thing. But at the same time, if the government operates in total secrecy about everything, if our soldiers are going out and shooting men, women and children, if they're torturing people, those are things we want to know about. So there needs to be some ability to I can understand it being much more curtailed there and the information being a little bit more held, but they can't be a law unto themselves, otherwise you will get people being tortured and shooting civilians and cover-ups and this sort of thing.
Our time's nearly at an end, but is there a correct Christian response to what we see happening? I mean, should we be the ones who are protesting? What should we? Is there something that Christians can add to the debate?
Well, I mean, there's the specific issues, and I think there are the broader principles involved. And I think there is something to be said for how. I mean, I can articulate it in the short time we have, but for the idea that government shouldn't have the complete power to just search and seizure, tap phones, that certain civil liberties like the right to be presumed innocent or proven guilty, not have your stuff messed with until without probable cause, are actually important principles. Limiting government's power, given the propensity of government to towards sin and towards corruption, and the human beings when they're given power, how they act, and issues of secrecy and accountability. I think there are important issues there that people like the US founding fathers and stuff like that were aware of the theological basis for that are important, and I think they are worth us, not necessarily, I'm not saying we need to go out and protest this particular bill, but they are worth Christians thinking about and taking seriously, rather than taking an attitude of, well, I've got nothing to fear, so who cares, because the reality is that assumes a kind of beneficence to the government, which may be true now in our particular context, given the civil liberties we have, but I think it's just, if you look at governments worldwide historically, it's just naive.
Matt, it's fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for this week, but don't forget you can also take in our sister programme, Nzone Focus, where the team this week looks at the escalating social cost of heavy drinking. But for now, from all of us, ka kite anō. Bye for now.